Hey, this is Josiah from the future making a brief correction. At one point I referenced that the president of Ukraine after the Orange Revolution was Lukashenko, and I meant Yushchenko. Lukashenko is the current president of Belarus. Anyway, enjoy the episode.
I'm definitely like internationalist type who thinks that I should actually just I should just oppose imperialism. What Russia wants out of Ukraine is a pliant client state. Like, if we believe in democracy, we should let people pick how their governments are structured.
You are listening to Fruitless, a podcast hosted by me, Josiah Sutton. This is episode 3, Ukraine is a Rorschach test, featuring Chris Barker, where we talk about the war in Ukraine in historical context. Well, yes, yeah. Welcome to Fruitless, everybody.
Welcome to Fruitless.
I am joined today by Chris Barker, longtime friend of mine, masters in Russian history, feels notable to throw in there. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Chris. I live in Tennessee now. I didn't used to. The last time I talked on one of Josiah's podcasts, I lived in Iowa. But yeah, the problem with having a master's in Russian history is when you get a master's degree, you get it in something like really, really specific, and it wasn't on Ukraine.
But frankly, close enough. I don't know anyone else.
Did have to learn a lot about the country, so I know some things. I feel slightly more equipped to talk about this than a lot of the randos who've only read theory books.
What was your thesis on? You should say that.
It's on the Volga Tatars, which are different from the Crimean Tatars, who are relevant to today's discussion.
Yes, I was curious if they were relevant or yes. if it was the same thing or not.
The Crimean Tatars are definitely relevant to today's discussion, but the Volga Tatars aren't really. They're in Tatarstan. It's a semi-autonomous kind of republic in the Russian Federation on the Volga River. Capital is Kazan. It's got massive oil and natural gas deposits, so it's a pretty wealthy area of Russia. Kazan is probably the second or third richest city in Russia. No, probably third or fourth, I would say. Sorry. Petersburg and Moscow are definitely richer, but then it's like, is it Kazan or is it Nizhny Novgorod? That's basically the question there. Maybe you could throw in Sochi because of all of the recent investment with sports and stuff down there. But
right.
Anyway, so the Tatars are the largest majority Muslim ethnic group in Russia. I think they might actually be the largest non-Russian ethnic group. I can't remember that off the top of my head right now. But they're definitely the largest majority Muslim ethnic group, the Volga Tatars, and they're like the remnants of the Mongol horde from way back in the day.
Yeah.
I wrote my entire thesis on even within the Russian Federation itself, you've got, Dagestan and Chechnya and Ingushetia are these conflict zones where you've got, Muslim, quote unquote separatists, and there's a lot of violence and terrorism going on, both from the state and from the from paramilitaries within the within those ethnic groups. But then the Tatars are just sitting here in the middle of in the heart of European Russia, just being chill. Everybody kind of likes the Tatars. I was trying to figure out why that was. Basically settled on. They got rich and were smart and insinuated themselves into Soviet leadership pre breakup of the Soviet Union.
Yeah. So there is some relevance to us, kind of, I guess we haven't formally said, but we're going to talk about Ukraine from kind of a historical context and kind of where we think the discourse is going wrong here.
Yes.
But, I think that thesis isn't necessarily unrelated to this, because you have a lot of thought about how Russian minority groups fit in with Russia, and Ukraine in a lot of ways is, this question of minority groups, both Ukrainians being a former minority group of Russia, and then you also have the Russian-speaking minority groups within Ukraine now, and then the Tatars, and
yeah, absolutely. And it was like slightly controversial when the Ukrainian SSR was created as distinct from the Russian SSR. During the Soviet Union, there were a lot of people who were like, no, Ukraine is just a region of Russia, and they're just a minority group that lives in Russia, and that's not its own country. And so there was problems there. Khrushchev gave Crimea back to the Ukrainian SSR at some point during his premiership of the Soviet Union, and so that was land that was part of the Russian SSR, but then got given to Ukraine in the 50s. At some point, which is part of what Putin used to as a pretext for retaking Crimea in 2014, was that like, hey, this hasn't even been Ukrainian, quote unquote, for 100 years. This is our land. We should have it. And that's basically also what he's saying now, is like, this hasn't been Ukraine for more than 100 years. This has been Russia for time immemorial. It's not Ukraine, it's Russia. It's mine. I get it. Yeah. Like,
well,
maybe,
we'll see.
maybe incorrect, buddy. Maybe. God, we'll fucking see.
We'll see. So let's start, and we're gonna try our best to kind of walk through the history of Ukraine here to kind of bring us to the present moment here, because there's a lot of history that's going into this, crisis, and I feel like a lot of people are rapidly doing a lot of research trying to understand what's happening right now. I know, I wasn't like unfamiliar with Russian or Ukrainian history, but I know that I've spent a lot of time filling myself in over the last couple weeks on details I was missing. So I guess before even getting to the Soviet Union or whatever, what was Ukraine in like Imperial Russia? So before the revolution, before communism.
Well, shit, man, we got to even go back further than Imperial Russia. So, like, a big part of Putin's, rhetorical stance for why they should get this is that essentially the modern day Russian state can trace itself back to this, medieval era thing called Kievan Rus. The Prince Vladimir got baptized, created Kievan Rus, got a bunch of associated states in a rough confederation. Veliki Novgorod, Lvov, all of those areas. And so what became what we think of as Russian culture really actually did start in Ukraine. But then it like came to its full blossoming in what is Russia, and then like Ukrainian culture became its own distinct and different thing, over the course of many, many years. I can't even, God, when was Kievan Rus? Jesus.
I mean, that's talking medieval here, but you could see that's
a very, very long time ago, but that's the kind of stuff that they were, that the current Russian government is trying to kind of call back to say like, no, this is where we came from. So if this is where we came from, then that's our land too. Yeah. Looks like Kievan Rus is from the late 800s to about 1240, 1250.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I mean, this is how a lot of like nationalist projects in Europe kind of play out that I think feels kind of odd to Americans. But, because actually the original thing I asked you to come on for, and one day we will return to it, is to talk about 1848, the revolutions of 1848 in Russia.
Essentially the creation of European nationalism. I mean, like, they all hated each other and were warring with each other for forever and, up until that point. But, like, it was like the French Revolution is a bit of the spark, that like sets things smoldering for the next half century. But like, 1848 is essentially when everybody decided, we're a country now. Yeah. Oh boy.
And the 19th century, The 19th century is like when you imagine nations, when you think of what it means to be someone to be German, it was really birthed in the 19th century. It was the product of poets and authors and romanticist writing, thinking back on a kind of fantasy of the medieval period. And looking back at the German people.
Yeah.
So both Ukraine and Russia kind of have their ties back to the same medieval kingdom, Kiev and Rus, which is funny because you look at the name there, you can see the roots of both of those there. Kiev being the capital of Ukraine and Rus becoming Russia.
Yeah.
But a split happens kind of during the imperial era.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, just in general, it's harder to enforce uniform culture across large distances than it is now, right? I think we talked briefly, I think last week, about this idea that within the United States, we're rapidly just getting two accents instead of all of the different regional accents. There's a rural accent and an urban accent now, and everybody talks one or the other way, basically. If you're younger than 40. And a big part of that is because you now have the ability to push cultural expectations beyond how far a fucking horse can get in one day, right?
Yeah, because of
we had all
internet and stuff. Yeah,
exactly. The TV, internet, movies, all of that stuff is it's a homogenizing force more than anything else, and so then mass media is a homogenizing force that wasn't really present before, and so that you just in the imperial era of Russia, it just Ukraine became its own thing. It was. For a while, Kiev and Rus wasn't actually under Russian dominion, but then Russia took it over, and it treated it as though it was its own, as though it was just Russia, right? And they sent a bunch of people there to settle it. It was like a pre-colonial era attempt at colonialism, but Ukrainians still had their own distinct culture. Ukraine and Russia still argue about, is Nikolai Gogol a Ukrainian or a Russian? I mean, the answer is both. But yeah. So it was messy in the way that everything is messy in that time. It's hard to tell who is what. Things don't begin to crystallize until late in the 19th century and into the 20th century, when Ukraine really is its own separate thing.
Yeah.
And then we have the Holodomor, which really crystallizes Ukrainian identity, because the Russians weren't the ones who were starving to death; it was the Ukrainians, and so they really now knew that okay, we're different than them,
right?
Or at least they view us as different than them.
Yeah,
that's something that's pretty significant as well.
Yeah, one of the most consistent military strategies in Russian history is kind of to fuck over Ukraine too, because Ukraine being part of Russia, the Napoleon's invasion of Russia, right? It was the scorched earth approach to responding to that. If you've ever read War and Peace, right? It's about you burn everything and just keep retreating until Napoleon's army's worn down. And they did the same thing to the Nazis. And Ukraine was the place that got burnt down. And then you sandwich between both of those events, one of the, most horrific famines, the Soviet Union ever witnessed. And the debate about whether or not it was intentional, whether or not it was kind of a conscious genocidal action. I mean, this is a group of people that's been fucked over a lot.
Yeah. But then you go through the 1900s, right? And you've got Ukraine gets turned back into the breadbasket. They get out of the famine, and Ukraine is just the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. It's an area of heavy industrialization as well. They've got the mining areas in the eastern part of Ukraine, Donbass and Luhansk, places that people now know exist.
Names I admittedly frantically Googled a couple weeks ago.
People know exist now, but like there's a lot of stuff in the ground out there, which is part of why Russia wants it.
Yeah.
And also part of why Ukraine doesn't want to give it up, because like there's stuff in the ground that we can sell.
Yeah.
We would like to have that. You've got, obviously everyone knows about Chernobyl. I mean, that's not a specifically they did that to screw over Ukraine thing. That was just an
accident, but it adds to
that wasn't intentional by any stretch of the imagination. Some people just fucked up a bunch of times in a row in the exact way that would produce a bad outcome.
Yeah.
There are so many things that could have gone differently and everything would have been fine, but
yeah, they
just rolled snake eyes all day long. But there's also, if you look at the Dnieper River, there's tons of hydroelectric dams on it. They've like really dammed that up. The Soviet Union did, just like they've done with the Volga. So they produce they've got all these water reservoirs and they produce a lot of hydroelectric power. Like, Ukraine is a thoroughly industrialized country because of all of the money that the Soviet Union poured into it. And then the Soviet Union collapsed and Ukraine got its independence. And then I think it was in 93 or 94. It was either 93 or 94. I can't remember exactly when. I'm going to look it back up. Anyway, there was a thing where basically Ukraine gave up its nukes. And they got a pinky promise from Russia that Russia wouldn't try to take them back over. So, maybe they shouldn't have given up their nukes.
One of the yeah, that's hard because I'm in general anti-nuclear proliferation. However, when it was the only thing they had,
because that's the problem with the logic of nuclear arms is that, like, once you have them, it makes no sense to give them up.
Yeah, which is
part of why you see places like North Korea or Iran trying to pursue nuclear arms, because now that gives you some
sort of bargaining.
Well, yeah, it gives you just a much stronger negotiating position on anything, and it makes it so that like nobody can try to be territorially aggressive against you.
Yeah,
you'll just get blown up. So it's like once you have nukes, it makes very little sense to give them up. But it would be way better for humanity if nobody had nukes.
One thing you mentioned that I wanted to pull back to was the amount of money the Soviet Union poured into Ukraine and developed Ukraine, right? Because I by accident read a Russian propaganda book leading up to this, which has actually been kind of... Yes. No, because I'm just, at my job trying to research this as best I can while working. So I'm like, whatever's on Audible is just basically what I have to read. And, it's a book called Euromaidan and Neonazis. And I'm like, perfect. I want to read about that. And I didn't see there were two authors. So I Googled the first author and nothing really about him. So I was like, whatever. Right. The second author worked for Putin, though. Oh. And it became pretty apparent pretty fast. It is very much a propaganda book. Like, it's not that it lies about the existence of Svoboda or whatever, which we'll get into later, but it just it emphasizes lots of Russian talking points. And really the Russian view seems to be that, like, as Ukrainians kind of have a sense of they were this colonized people, they got fucked over. They were the punching bag. Russia kind of sees them as the ungrateful child.
Right. We spent so much money on you. We spent so much time on you.
Yeah.
Why won't you love us? And it's like, because you keep hurting us?
Yeah. Because that's what, I mean, it says it like in the very beginning of the book. And I was like, that was one of those sinking feelings. And that was when I started Googling the other author, where they were like, it's kind of incorrect to call, Ukraine's, position under Russia colonization, because they, it's the only case of colonization where they got developed from it. And I was like, yeah, but that's what fucking colonizers also say.
That's what we have always said, right? At least Nigeria got those nice railway lines. Yeah, those nice railway lines that we ripped up when we left. Like what the fuck, man?
It's
Come
like
on.
fucking white man's burden shit. You
got civilized by us, so it was okay that we were brutal to you for hundreds of years. No, it's not.
It's not. So we come to the fall of the Soviet Union. Ukraine gets rid of its nukes, and this happens in 91 to 94, and we now have this
December 5th, 1994. They signed the Budapest Memorandum, which formalizes that Ukraine is going to destroy all of its nukes, and Russia will stop fucking with Ukraine. And that lasted for 6 years.
So
the nukes got destroyed, so that's nice. But the fucking with Ukraine didn't last for very long.
So Ukraine, like a lot of post-Soviet republics, which is a subject I kind of in general want to read a lot more about, enters into just kind of a weird period of trying to figure out what it is. And that's, what it's been for the last few decades, with Russian meddling, with, questions of whether or not to side more with NATO or with, the kind of Western powers versus the Eastern powers. So I guess, let's.
No, yeah. I mean, like it in so many ways, Ukraine's experience is also, it's a sibling of Russia's experience. Russia has always kind of been trapped with this idea of like, do we face East or do we face West? Right. And like, Ukraine also has this problem. Do we face East to Russia? Do we face West to the rest of Europe? A lot of the economic problems that Russia experienced in the 90s because of the absolutely cack-handed shock therapy, thing that we did to their economies. Well, Ukraine experienced that as well. As so did Poland, so did Hungary, so did all of the post, communist states. We all just like shock therapy, austerity, privatized them. And it was, I think it's safe to say now, with the benefit of like 30 years of hindsight, that was an absolute fucking catastrophe, and that what we needed to do was something closer to like a Marshall Plan, so that we were able to like hold on to, social safety nets in these places, keep social cohesion high in these places, rather than just absolutely destroying them. You look at the life expectancies in almost every place after the collapse of communism, and like life expectancy falls off a cliff for like 10 years. And it's because like people were losing their livelihoods. They weren't able to have their retirements, so they were just killing themselves or just drinking themselves to death.
Yeah, because a lot of the, I don't know if you could quite call it welfare under communism, but the social programs that existed under communism just disappeared.
Yeah, they just go away, and what it just gets replaced with crappy capitalism that does not help anybody. Yeah, and just forces people to be predatory to one another, and so Ukraine is experiencing a lot of the same stuff, and fits and starts. The development of democracy there has been imperfect, to say the least, but it seems like it's a place that it seems like a citizenry that like genuinely does want to govern itself, rather than like it like wants to resist the idea of autocracy. It wants to resist the idea of that sort of thing. They seem like a fractious bunch, which is good for democracy.
Yeah.
And so like, they're just, and that, but they're stuck between two great powers. Essentially, they're stuck between Russia and the European Union, which I would argue that I think that everyone is making a pretty big category error, talking about NATO all the time. The bigger player here is the European Union.
Yeah, I can see that.
NATO is just like, it's an obsolete thing that doesn't really need to exist, and it only exists because of institutional inertia. But like, the really powerful thing that is attractive to people is the European Union. I mean, that's why that's why Hungary is still in the European Union, because it makes no sense to leave it once you're in it. You know, I mean, that's I mean, you know, like Britain is ruining the day that they left. It was stupid to do that. You know, Turkey still wants to try to join the European Union, even though now at this point, with all of Erdogan's shenanigans, they're not going to let him in. But like, they still want to join, because why wouldn't you want to be part of the second biggest economy on the planet?
Right. You know, and we can briefly throw NATO into this as a player too. So NATO, is you know, if you are very unaware, NATO was an alliance formed during the Cold War among, again, you know, the First World, essentially, among the anti-communist countries. And so it continuing to exist for a lot of Russians feels bizarre. It feels like it's an alliance that was formed against an ideology that we no longer hold. Right. It seems like it exists as an anti-Russian force.
Yeah, and frankly, it is kind of silly that it still exists. I mean, NATO should have, in '93, when Russia asked to join, NATO should have said yes and let them in. Or NATO should have been like, no, we're actually just going to disband. We all like each other anyways. We all have multilateral alliances with each other anyway. And we're just going to disband, and there's no reason for this, like, putatively anti-Russian organization to continue to exist. But by not letting Russia in and continuing to exist, it is an antagonistic specter haunting Russia.
Right.
And that is definitely a problem. But I don't think that you can blame NATO for what Putin has decided to do here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's it is a player, and there's a reason that leftists are very skeptical of NATO when you talk about NATO's continued involvement in Libya, for instance, or plenty of disasters on the hands of NATO following the fall of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can even reasonably quibble with NATO intervention in the Yugoslav wars. You know, it's hard to say whether or not we made those situations better.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe they would have been worse. It's impossible to prove a negative, but
but we threw a bunch of bombs into a really complex situation. So that's another '90s post-Soviet reality right there. But so we get to the 2000s of Ukraine. It's just been devastated by intense austerity, disappearance of social safety nets. You've got the rise of like the oligarchs. We see like a bunch of people took advantage of the collapsing economy, went in, bought a bunch of shit, and took over, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, I guess maybe you can help me fill this in a bit. How does this build to 2008 and the color revolution?
Yeah, I mean, so as I was saying, like, you know, Ukraine has it's a very young democracy in general, and you know, according to Economic Fortune, it's kind of been oscillating between being more Russia facing or more Western facing. And a guy, oh crap,
Yukash, nope.
I want to say Yanukovych.
Yanukovych, that sounds right.
I feel like maybe that's correct. I can't believe I'm blanking on this right now.
Revolution.
Yep, Yanukovych. Haha.
Yeah, Yanukovych gets replaced by Lukashenko.
Yes, but Yanukovych had been elected as more or less a Western-facing person, and then about-faced in the middle of his term. Lots of allegations of corruption and, you know, graft going on here, you know, just essentially siphoning from the coffers of the state to enrich himself. But he made this very significant about face on Ukraine's position, like geopolitical positioning, essentially. The majority of Ukrainians had, for at least a bit of time, been pro more European integration. They had kind of started down this path of membership in the EU, of greater integration with the EU, and then all of a sudden Yanukovych just about faces with that and begins begins striking deals with Russia and for greater economic integration with Russia. And people are like, no, that's not what we have voted for. This is not what we want. We don't want more integration with Russia. We want to be separate from Russia. We want more integration with Europe. And then we got Euromaidan. And I don't find the idea that this was like a CIA coup convincing at all, because if it was, then in the relatively free and fair elections that we have had in Ukraine post this, you would have seen public sentiment snap back from it, right? Because that's what has happened everywhere else. There's been CIA meddling. As soon as you get a free and fair election, public sentiment snaps back from the shit the CIA tried to do, because it's not what people actually wanted. Well, people in Ukraine do seem to actually want to be more integrated with Europe and with the European Union. They want to have access to those money markets. They want to have access to those commodities markets. They want for greater freedom of movement for their people and for people coming into Ukraine. Like, there's a whole bunch of really compelling geopolitical reasons why you would want to move yourself away from an aging, slowly dying Russian, pole and towards, a Western European pole that has also, if you are part of Europe, you are essentially by proxy allied with the United States. So you're like an ally of the biggest dick in town. It makes complete sense why you would want to be friends with that guy. Like, all of these things make a lot of sense. Now, again, obviously, I don't think that the United States is great, but it makes a lot of sense why countries want to be friends with us.
Right. So we're talking about this era that this is where leftists start to get bad at talking about Ukraine oftentimes. Barring certain types of authoritarian leftists that were bad about it when you talk about the 30s even. But no.
Tankies are definitely on board with Putin's with Putin's rhetoric here, because goddamn right, Vlad, it was always Russia.
So you have these two like kind of uprisings that take place: the Orange Revolution in 2004 to 5, and then the more bloody one, which is Euromaidan, or the Revolution of Dignity, depending on who you ask. Orange Revolution was pretty much bloodless for the most part. It looks like Yanukovych getting pushed out, Lukashenko taking over. There's also the fun little detail throw in when Putin tried to poison Lukashenko.
Like caloric acne now on his face.
He looks like Steve Bannon.
I mean, they were, God, man, I don't know, because like that was also a the Orange Revolution was definitely a socially conservative revolution as well. It was definitely like a nationalist, socially conservative thing, and like they were pursuing policies of austerity to begin with, and then they got their asses kicked by the global financial crisis, which is what allowed Yanukovych to get back into power in the first place, because they bungled everything about the financial crisis so badly. Like Yanukovych was able to come back to power through a popular election.
Yeah, and this was in what that would have been for the 2008 crisis. So 2010. Yeah. Okay.
2010 is when Yanukovych came back into power, and but like he gets brought back into power because everyone hated the other government, not because they liked him.
Yeah,
and definitely not because they wanted to like change their geopolitical orientation. They just didn't want these assholes in power who were destroying the government and like all of the apparatus of state that was what was left of it that was supporting people. They didn't want that, so they got rid of it.
Yeah. And so, yeah, so that's what, 2010, and then we moved to Euromaidan in 2013 to 2014, the Revolution of Dignity. And this is, again, Yanukovych gets shoved out.
Yeah.
Finally. But this one was a lot more bloody, and this is what a lot of leftists point to, because this is a point when those soft, moderate nationalists in the Orange Revolution, some of them crystallize into being very, very scary nationalists with guns.
Yeah. That's true, but you can't look at that happening without also talking about, and this is something that this is something that makes me fear for the future in Ukraine, regardless of what the outcome here is. But like those squishy nationalists from 2010 morphed into scary nationalists in 2014 because of state violence. Like they could have just stayed squishy nationalists that you've got to like convince and like work around. But like state violence is a radicalizing thing for people on both sides, right? It can radicalize you to the right, or it can radicalize you to the left. You know, I think for both of us, witnessing state violence has been a leftwardly radicalizing thing. But that's not how everybody experiences state violence, particularly in different contexts. And
especially in the context of a country that's grappling for national identity at this time.
Exactly. And you're seeing your state that theoretically represents your national identity explicitly trying to purge you from government, from having a say in service of, to your mind, another country that is not you, but that seemingly wants to dominate your country. And now, look, it's not the road I would go down, but you can see where that pressure point and inflection point happens. And for some people pick one road and some people pick another road. And unfortunately, I mean, there's a decent sized cadre of very right-wingedly radicalized people within Ukraine. But again, I said it before we even started recording, I think, but it's like when we're criticizing Ukraine for having right-wingers in its military, it's like, I don't know, man, physician, heal thyself. Worry about the log in your eye, guys. Like,
oh yeah. I mean, we're talking about both Russia or the U.S.
Yeah, like, come on. There's any number of things that I could say where it's just like, yeah, having a military is inherently right-wing. There's going to be psychos.
Yeah.
There's no way around it. Having a police force is an inherently right-wing thing. There's going to be psychos. You can either work to eliminate militaries and police forces, or you can accept that there are going to be psychos in militaries and police forces, and that's just kind of how it is. Only profoundly broken people want to hurt people.
Yeah, right.
For a country,
right?
For a country where all of the laws are made up, they don't even fucking matter. No laws are real. No laws are real. People go, it's unconstitutional. Fuck, they're doing it anyway. The laws are real. Sorry, that's a completely different unhinged.
No, you're right.
But it's like only like genuinely though, like when it comes to like militaries and things like that, like the only people who sign up to do military service, particularly in wartime, are people who want to kill for something that isn't real. Right? Something that is an entirely human construct. It's not fucking real.
Right.
But people are willing to kill for it, and that's the only kind of people you're going to get in an army. You know, I don't think it's probably the majority of Ukrainian forces, but it's definitely more than is ideal, because the ideal number is 0.
Well, and so this is where what I think distinguishes a clear-eyed look at the Ukrainian right wing versus what Russian propaganda tends to do, which is to what extent how much of a majority or how powerful of a force do you see the right wing in Ukraine? Because, like this Russian book that I was reading, they really act like this is the puppet strings behind everything that's going on, which is just not the case.
It's just like, look at the makeup of the Rada.
Right.
You know?
Yes, Svoboda does not have that much power.
Yeah, but it's the current, I think the current governing coalition, let me fucking check again, but I'm pretty sure
most of them are part of the Servant of the People Party.
Yeah, and that's a center-left party.
Yeah.
Like, the governing coalition is a center-left governing coalition. Mm-hmm. The actual truly right, because this is a functioning fucking country that has multi-parties instead of just two, like our stupid country. But, like, the actual right wing in Ukraine has no fucking power.
Right.
They're not even the formal opposition. They're the backbenchers to the backbenchers.
Yes.
They're the fucking 8th grade baseball team. They're not even the varsity football team.
They had a brief burst in popularity, but even then you're talking about like 20% right after Euromaidan, but now they're nothing. They are relegated primarily to these paramilitary forces. Yeah.
Their strength is strongest in areas that are closest to areas that Russia has been fucking with. Mm-hmm. Because of course they are. Because those are the areas that are having to deal with Russian fuckery the most. So of course people are being radicalized to the right in those areas.
Well, of course people are being radicalized, period, in those areas, because those areas are also where, like, you see also the anarchist paramilitaries or the more like leftist kind of organizations that exist there are also combating these same things. And they are also combating the existing government. You know, there's a lot of fucking moving pieces in Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, it's like people always like, you know, a fun trivia question is, what party got the second most votes in the German election that got Hitler the chancellorship?
Is that liberal?
It was the fucking communists.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
The communists got the second most votes in that election because the entire society was radicalizing because nothing was fucking working right.
Yeah.
So everyone was rushing to the edges and the squishy fucking centrists went with the fascists. And like, that's the fear in Ukraine, is that the squishy centrists are going to go with the fascists. But right now, at least it seems like actually the center is holding and that we're not going to go down the fascist route.
The Ukrainian center is
for now
is kind of a fun thing to talk about because like right now there's kind of like this idolizing of Zelensky going on that's, you know, increasingly getting more and more annoying, but
more absurd because genuinely up to this point he was a complete nothing burger of a politician. He was just competently being a president. Okay.
I love talking about Zelensky. I feel like because the press is trying to frame him as a hero, they don't talk about like his prior history as much. He grew to rose to fame on a TV program called Servant of the People, which is also the name of the party that he formed.
Yeah.
And it's a like kind of almost Sorkin-esque type politics show where he plays a history teacher who goes on a rant about corrupt politicians, and the video goes viral, and then he accidentally gets elected president. So it's about this everyday liberal guy who fumbles his way into the presidency.
And why couldn't that be me? I'm not old enough to be the president. Also, I don't want to be the president.
No, it'd be terrible.
It's impossible to be a good human being and be the president of the United States. Well, I think any modern country, honestly. I just don't think you can be a good human being and be the leader of a modern state. I don't think you can do it.
So yeah, it was they ended up rebranding the centrist party after the name of that show, and part of it was also to save money on advertising because they could advertise the coming third season of the show during his presidential run, and he won really, really strongly against the incumbent who was the owner of the Channel 5 News, there's a whole weird Baudrillardian information war that's been going on the last few, whatever. But Zelensky was in the Pandora Papers at the end of last year that dropped, and so he has his own ties to corruption and investment in the United Kingdom.
A rich motherfucker. even before serving the people, he was a rich motherfucker. He was like, I did a little bit of I did a little bit of looking into like his past comedy, because he was also like, he's just a stand-up comic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or like an unbelievably popular stand-up comic who basically created the Ukrainian comedy scene, which is, I think, insane. He was like so popular in Russia that he just like completely ripped his brand out of Russia, went like, no, we're doing Ukrainian comedy now. Here's Ukrainian comedy. We're not trying to pander to Russians. We're not speaking in Russian. We're speaking in Ukrainian now. Let's fucking do this. And he like basically created the entire Ukrainian comedy scene in the 2000s. Like, that's stupid. And I watched a couple of his. He has some spicy routines.
I've heard of him playing piano with his penis on TV at one point.
There's this one where he's like joking about Bandera, Stepan Bandera, the famous fascist collaborator, the Ukrainian nationalist fascist collaborator from World War II. He's like joking about Bandera, and he's reading a monologue, and like the monologue is like facially like, look, we're like Banderites, and we're like, you know, like we're allowed to like steal from people as long as they're Russian, and everything is fine. And he's like, it's like facially this very like fascist thing, but like when you are watching him, you're watching him be like, this is bad. This is not good stuff. You are bad people for laughing at these jokes that I am telling you right now.
Yeah.
But like you have to have the full context of like watching the skit, because he's being really spicy with this.
Yeah.
He's like essentially pulling people's like Russian antipathy out and making them laugh at like anti-Russian stuff, but then with his performance being like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
You know? But he is just like, anyway.
Yeah, really, it's really interesting. But before the invasion, he was at a 31% approval rating, partially from a hit from the Pandora Papers revelation. And, you know, his career was collapsing in some way. And then the invasion, and now he's at a 90% because, you know, at the end of the day, you don't see many, you know, presidents in our modern age stay in a city that's getting sieged. You know, so kudos to him for that, for sure. Yeah, but
a lot of people who would just be like, okay, well, I guess I'm fighting now.
Yeah. But I think he's kind of an interesting, like, I don't know, case study of like the kind of, I don't know, he played a character of just, I'm the not corrupt guy. And people in Ukraine desperately rush to that because, you know, that's what they're like looking for right now.
Yeah. I mean, that's what honestly, basically every, you could repeat it across literally every fucking democratized country right now. It's everything is so every political office is just so incessantly captured. You mean, you look at like all of the corruption scandals that Boris Johnson keeps running dick first into. You know, like Macron is obviously a patsy of finance. You know, he's utterly shit to his core. You know, Angela Merkel was like hardly a delight when it comes to like things that actually matter in the world, rather than like just being mean to Greece. Yeah. You know, it totally makes sense that people would just like see somebody whose outward affect is, I'm just a normal guy and I don't take bribes from people, and be like, yes. I mean, that's part of people like Donald Trump, because he was so cartoonishly corrupt. They were like, doesn't fucking matter. He's bought everybody. You know, it's like a horseshoe theory of corruption there. You know,
well, I think like,
sorry,
you know, it's kind of an interesting product of like, I don't know, neoliberalism and austerity, right? You have these increasingly corrupt politicians, and then people craving lack of corruption, and then people taking on roles and characters that they play that exudes non-corruptedness or an embrace of corruptedness, or it's, you know, it's all,
The only way I think really to get around this you gotta rebuild state capacity so that like people's lives aren't dependent on corporations. Okay, we're getting off topic. I'm sorry.
No.
I'm ranting about shit that is not at all connected to Ukraine.
Well, I mean, I think austerity is definitely related to Ukraine. But yeah,
general situation of the world.
Right. So I mean that kind of brings us up to what has happened in the last couple of weeks.
3 months ago, essentially, when the United States started being like, "Hey, everybody, hey, wait, you guys realize there's an army on the border, right? Like there's an army on the border. They're going to do something." Yeah. That's like 3 months ago. The United States started being like, "You guys, they're going to do something."
And, the United States, NATO, whatever you want to point to, has kind of a boy that cried wolf scenario that occurred there.
Exactly. and like you and I have talked about this before, is like leftists have a well-earned reflexive distrust of shit the United States says.
Yeah.
And I will even admit that like at very first, I was like, come on. But then I saw satellite photos and I was like, oh, that's a fucking army. Okay. Yeah. Okay. There's an army here. He's going to do something. And you could like follow Putin's rhetoric that was steadily increasing, and like steadily escalating. And also just like, look, he took Crimea. Like he already did that. And he engaged in World War I style trench warfare in Luhansk and Donbass for the last 8 years. He's already at war.
That's a chunk we kind of left out there. But yeah, after Euromaidan, of course, Russia responded by annexing Crimea, doing a little referendum to show it was a democratic maneuver.
Absolutely a horseshit referendum. Sure. And people will cite the results of this fucking referendum, but I am sorry. I told you this, but like the Crimean Tatars are like 30% of the population of Crimea. And they have a uniquely antagonistic, like even more antagonistic than Ukrainians' relationship to Russia. It is impossible for me to believe the Crimean Tatars fucking voted 90-10 in favor of annexation to Russia. It's just not fucking possible.
Just doesn't
transparently bullshit vote. A transparently bullshit vote that only served to give the barest of fig leaf covers to an aggressive military takeover of territory of a sovereign nation.
Yeah.
Like, that was bullshit. And then, like, Russia keeps saying that, like, we don't have any military units in Luhansk and Donbass. That's bullshit. Everyone knows it's bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're paying them. They're Russian military units. Like, they might be dudes from Luhansk and Donbass, but, like, if you're paying them, and everyone knows that you're paying them, everyone knows that you're paying these separatists, that means they're Russian military. Right? That's what that means. And there's been trench warfare for 8 years in Luhansk and Donbass.
Yeah, and that's an important detail. We were talking about radicalizing forces here of state suppression. So you have a lot of the state suppression of like the pro-Russian separatist groups, which in turn has led to its own atrocities and whatever, and increased tensions, increased radicalization of the separatists. And so we come to this really fractious point in Ukraine, and then the invasion.
Yeah, but I would just say also, like, it's like, I think I likened it to you that, like, there's like New Hampshire separatists who want to have like New Hampshire be but like they don't mean anything, like they're nothing, and they won't mean anything until like some conservative billionaire gives them a ton of money to start trying to like actively try to subvert the government of the state of New Hampshire and get them to secede. Right? Like these pro-Russian separatists were at most, when all of this started, an extremely annoying but tiny minority. But like Russia funded them. Russia is paying them. Russia is sending them their weapons. Russia is shooting down airplanes in Ukraine for them. like jetliners in Ukraine. Everyone has memory hold the fact that Russia shot down a jet plane in Ukraine and killed a bunch of Dutch people. Yes, everyone forgets that they did that, but they did.
Yeah.
Like none of those separatist groups last at all against the power of the Ukrainian state if the Russian state is not funding them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like they can like huff and puff and put their chests out, but like if Russia is not funding these separatist groups in Luhansk and Donbass, Ukraine just comes in and goes, "This is Ukraine. Fuck off." Like, no, you're not joining Russia.
Right.
This is Ukraine. You can be here. You can be Ukrainian. You can continue to speak Russian. We're not going to stop you. I mean, we are going to say that everyone needs to learn Ukrainian, but we can also learn Russian. Anyway, there's a lot of cultural.
That's a whole other.
You got to like deal with out in the eastern part of Ukraine, because something that was very controversial was the Ministry of Education being like, Ukrainian is now the primary language that kids have to learn in school, and Russian will be like an elective course. And the closer to the border with Russia you get, the more people are native Russian speakers, obviously. People are like, well, we speak Russian here. Why aren't we learning Russian as our first language in primary school and then having Ukrainian as a secondary language choice? That's fine. That's a very complicated and difficult question to answer, but it's one that you it's one that you answer with elections, not with armed uprisings.
Right. No, and and that's one of the grievances, because there is a lot of anti-Russian sentiment in Ukraine.
It's only getting worse now.
Yeah, some of it's going to get a lot worse now, and the people that suffer from that aren't necessarily just Russians like in Russia, but like the Russian minorities that exist, in Ukraine. They do suffer for that. And it's not that those people like that isn't worth empathy, but it does not justify the massive invasion that's taking place. But
it also doesn't. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No,
finish your thought. I'm sorry. It also doesn't change the fact that there are a lot of people who speak Russian and who are ethnically Russian, but who think of themselves as completely Ukrainian, and who like maybe want like for the Ukrainian state to like be a little more chill about the Russian language or Russian culture or whatever, but they're like, I'm not a Russian. I mean, I'm ethnically Russian, but I'm a Ukrainian. It's the same kind of, we have this phenomena in the United States, right? Immigrants from Mexico and Central America who are like, their first language is Spanish. They definitely feel like they're from whatever country they're from, but they also feel like they're American. So it's like, yeah, of course you're American, right? And like these people, like a lot of these Russian speakers, like you'll even see it sometimes, because in like some of these videos that have come out, there are people who are plainly speaking Russian to Russian soldiers. They're not speaking Ukrainian to Russian soldiers and yelling at them. They're speaking Russian and being like, look, I'm Russian. Like, I speak Russian. I am a Russian person, but I'm also Ukrainian, and you can't be fucking doing this shit. Like, you should not be here. This is Ukraine. We're Ukrainians. You need to leave us alone. Why are you in our country? Like, that is happening. There are people with dual consciousnesses, right? Where it's like, I'm Russian and I'm Ukrainian. I live in Ukraine. That means I'm a fucking Ukrainian. That means that other people need to stay out of my fucking country.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, like, part of the reason that we, I wanted to have you on and why we switched topics for the episode was because you and I are both kind of equally baffled, maybe would be a light way of putting it, at how the discourse, peeved, how the discourse on the left has kind of unfolded surrounding this. It part of it being like, part of it being understandable in the very beginning, where you have like, the general doubt of U.S. intelligence because Iraq, because I grew up in Iraq, like.
I watch these assholes lost launch misbegotten invasion after misbegotten invasion for my entire adult life. Not even my entire adult life, for my entire conscious life. Like, why the fuck do I trust these guys? And then it's like I said, then it's like, oh, but I saw the satellite photo. They're like, that's an army.
It was the recognition of the Donbass republics was when I kind of changed my tune. And then, once missiles start hitting Kiev, we're not dealing with, the press is fanning the flames of war again. This is a real invasion that's occurring right now. Yeah.
Not the press is fanning the flames of war again. And it's also not, I'm loath to give the government of the United States credit, but I think that everybody basically played the hand that they could play, America's not going to go to war over fucking Ukraine.
No. And they shouldn't, to be clear.
And they shouldn't. They absolutely shouldn't. But I know it's 40 million people and they're important. And it's there have been moments where my lizard brain responsibility to protect thing is triggering, but I'm no, actually Sam Power was wrong about responsibility to protect, and we don't need to do that shit. But the United States is not going to go to war over fucking Ukraine, not against another nuclear power. It's not going to fucking happen. And so Biden was pretty upfront about that. He's we're not gonna go to Russia's gonna invade, and we're gonna try to do diplomatic negotiations to avoid that, but we're not gonna fight there. We're not going to Ukraine. So you guys, this is gonna happen unless we can diplomatically resolve this situation. Oh, go ahead.
One thing I wanted to throw in here, because this is a kind of reoccurring leftist talking point. Do you think that the U.S. making it clear that Ukraine wouldn't join NATO would have been a good diplomatic move before the invasion, or not?
No, because again, I think I touched on it earlier. NATO's a fucking stalking horse for all of this shit.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The bigger thing is Europe.
Mm-hmm.
NATO's because again, NATO's just fucking vestigial, and maybe maybe NATO has a fucking bigger hold on the Russian Federation's leadership than I think it should. Mm-hmm. But NATO is a fucking appendix. It could be abolished today and nothing about world alliances would change at all.
Right.
Nothing.
But it, at least early on, around New Year's, I specifically remember that was the tune that Russia was saying was its issue, was NATO. But
that's the fig leaf justification for doing the evil thing you were going to do anyway. Right?
Yeah.
We are familiar with this by dint of being Americans. Americans say shit like this all the time when we're going to do something evil anyway that has nothing to do with the shit we say we're doing it for. Right? Yeah. So this is what has most frustrated me about the left's analysis of this, is that Putin is saying he's doing it for NATO reasons, but he's transparently doing it for evil imperialist reasons. And why can't we just fucking see through that? Because we see through it when the United States does evil shit for transparently evil reasons, but says they're doing it for a noble reason. We know when America is doing bad shit. Why can't we just call it out when Russia is doing bad shit for bad reasons?
No, I agree with that for a couple of reasons. One is Putin's speech leading up to the invasion made it very clear that he does not believe in Ukraine's national identity at all. And, and he also moved the propagandist reason toward the Nazi kind of talking point.
Denazification, which is just I'm sorry, buddy, it's way worse in your country. In Ukraine, obviously, it's way worse in your country, so shut the fuck up, dude. It's way worse in your country. I've lived there.
Right, absolutely. It's
swastikas. Come the fuck on, dude.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's why, and then on top of that, like once the invasion took place, like talks about NATO feels so irrelevant to what's going on right now.
Right, because NATO isn't actually relevant to what Russia wants out of Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's not. NATO's not relevant. What Russia wants out of Ukraine is a pliant client state that like continues to send it coal and metal and grain. That's what Russia wants from Ukraine. And Ukraine doesn't want to keep sending that to Russia. Or at least it wants to send it to Russia upon like market competitive terms. You know? It doesn't want to be a client state. Ukraine wants to
be a country.
Ukraine wants to choose its own adventure. You know? And like, you know what? I don't love the European Union because it's a bunch of shitty capitalist bourgeois quasi-authoritarian shitholes. Right? Like, it's no better than the United States. The European Union is not amazing. But like, if we actually believe in democracy, then a country should be allowed to choose that it wants to be in the European Union, right? It should be allowed to choose to join that. Like, if we believe in democracy, we should let people pick how their governments are structured. And we can disagree with those governments and we can try to change them to a left-wing perspective. But like, the overriding thing has to be that people get to fucking choose.
Right. Well, this is kind of the crisis of Ukraine right now, is because, you know, the reason there's a coalition of fighters on the ground that are anarchists, liberals, Nazis, all these things, is because they're all vying for the future of Ukraine. But with Russia taking over Ukraine, there's no future of Ukraine to even vie for.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, like, if you have this dream of a social democratic Ukraine or a socialist Ukraine or even a communist Ukraine, you know, if that's like your dream,
Russia takes it.
It doesn't happen if Russia takes it, right?
Yeah.
So we move that from there to maybe our own personal context. Like we're here in the U.S. and that's where the left is like struggling to figure out what to say. So you have like, the DSA's fucking
international committee.
Yeah, where they're like, we stand with the anti-war protesters in both countries. And it's like, what fucking anti-war protesters in both countries?
Right.
It feels like talking about the anti-war Palestinians. Like, what do you mean when you say that?
Yeah. They don't want there to be a war on them, but like, they're still in one.
Yeah, they've been invaded.
Like, do you think? Well, yeah, and like, or it's like we stand for all the abolitionist slaves. It's like, you guys, no slave wants to be enslaved.
Yeah,
like, come on.
It just it feels like a really bizarre both sidesing kind of thing that keeps happening.
And then they're calling for like immediate. They're calling for immediate diplomacy, and it's like, for to what end? Because like, genuinely, like, and they're decrying sanctions, which I am assuming we're gonna really, really get into here.
Yeah, we're gonna have to. Yeah,
but it's like the only leverage that Ukraine has right now, because its military is outmanned. It is the invaded party, and its military is outmanned right now. Mm-hmm. The only leverage that Ukraine has is international sanctions against Russia, right? Mm-hmm. And when people say like, you have to like drop the sanctions and we can start doing diplomatic negotiations, it's like, what fucking incentive does Russia have to enter into negotiations when they know we have more men, more tanks, more planes, more bombs? We can just keep going. Like, they have no incentive to stop absent diplomatic leverage. Yeah. And like, that's what sanctions provide.
So we've got, there's like three moves the US can kind of do. I mean, there's more than that, but really like three categories, right? So you got sanctions, you have sending arms to Ukraine, and then you have direct declare war on Russia. Right. The latter possibility both won't
do nothing.
Do nothing, right?
Yeah, I guess thankfully we're not doing. I do think that it is not inconsistent I've seen a lot of people, not a lot, but I've seen some people that I know who are like, the United States just should not be doing anything right now. This is none of our business. We should not be doing this. And I'm like, I genuinely do not understand how you can call yourself a leftist in solidarity with the common person and just not give a shit when somebody's country is invaded and not be like, hey, my country should do like not war things to stop this.
So we assume, direct military intervention then would be, for one, it's not going to happen. If it did, it would be a disaster. It would be World War III. It would be a nightmare. It should not happen.
Yeah. And we
even fucking Max Boot is saying that would be a bad idea.
I know. Max Bootlicker even thinks we should not go to war, which tells you that we really shouldn't go to war.
When the Hawks are hiding.
Yeah, but I do think that I said to you that, like, I think the only other option that Biden had would have been the only other realistic option that Biden had would have been to really actually say, look, if you invade, we'll declare war. Mm-hmm. That's the only other real option that Biden had. Yeah. And we would have been furious with Biden if he had done that. Because that would have been an unacceptable escalation.
Oh, yeah. So you have sending arms to the Ukrainian population. And part of the fear behind that, which is understandable, but I think, I don't know, I go back and forth on. These are the things I'm most ambiguous on, and so I kind of want to hash out these. Yeah. Is the fear of repeating the mistake that happened in Afghanistan in the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
That's
definitely an enormous fear for me.
Right. So what happened in the 80s, for those who don't know, of course, is the birth of the Taliban happened in the 80s, primarily because the U.S. was shoveling a bunch of arms into Afghanistan to resist Soviet
arms training. Yeah.
Yep. And then they fucking, started so the fear of these like Nazi paramilitaries, they don't have any power now, but you give them a bunch of fucking tanks and they sure might end up having power.
Exactly.
And so that's a fear. Yeah. That's a genuine, real fear.
Yes, exactly. I think that is my biggest fear in the current situation is that what we get out of this is a right wing that is armed with more deadly force than it had before. I don't think that much good usually comes from flooding countries with arms. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't really know what else to do.
Yeah.
I will say this. Poland is apparently doing this, proposing this interesting thing whereby they're going to just give Ukraine all of their MiG-29s. And then they're going to buy a bunch of F-16s and F-35s from the United States. So this works out nicely for Poland in multiple ways. One, they don't have to keep flying Russian shit anymore. Mm-hmm. And they don't have to get tech support from Russia for their planes, and they can just give them to Ukraine, and Ukraine can use them. And two, they get to get a bunch of new shit from the United States. It's way better.
Yep.
So that works out nicely for Poland. And honestly, I kind of don't hate this. Where it's just like, look, you guys know how to fly MiGs. This is going to the Polish Air Force. It's not going to not Polish Air Force, the Ukrainian Air Force. It's not going to some random fucking warlord or National Guard commander or whatever. It's like the actual Ukrainian Air Force getting MiGs. That's probably okay.
Yeah.
On balance.
Yeah, I'm tense about it because, I don't know. You've got your own right-wing rise occurring in Poland right now, too, of course. And so giving them a stronger military...
Look, that's a whole other thing that I don't know enough about to talk extemporaneously about, but is very concerning to me.
Yes. there's a lot of fears that go into dumping weapons into Ukraine.
I don't love it, but it does seem like the United States is like, at the very least, like being a little bit smarter about the kind of military aid that it is supplying now.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just like, it's like giving people like infrastructural upgrades instead of necessarily like actual weapons systems. I read an interesting piece about this earlier this week, where it's just like, actually the biggest stuff that we've been doing, as far as, because America has been like kind of giving Ukraine military aid for a while now. But like the biggest thing that we've been doing has not been like giving them like Patriot missiles or shit like that. We're just like giving them like secure walkie-talkies so that their units don't have to like communicate with cell phones that Russians can track. And we've been giving them like better radar so that they can like actually track things in the air better. And we've been giving them like we've been giving them better like targeting and coordinating equipment. And so then it's just like, look, the missiles you have are going to work fine. We're just making them more accurate, right? And like the tanks that you have work just fine. We're giving you better ways to coordinate them.
Right.
And so it doesn't mean that we're sending them like fucking Sherman tank or M1 Abrams, right? We're not sending them Abrams tanks and being like, here, good luck keeping this gas turbine engine up and running in the middle of Ukrainian winter. Like, you don't have any of the spare parts. It's like, no, just keep running the tanks you're running. We're going to give you like better communications equipment.
Yeah.
And then that seems to be like making a huge difference. And it's not necessarily flooding the country with AKs or M16s or manpads. Although I guess we are sending a lot of missiles there now. The nice thing about missiles is they mostly need to go into the air. And it's a little harder to use them against actual ground troops and stuff. So I guess that's nice. But it still feels weird.
It's harder to imagine like a right-wing insurgent group getting a hold of missiles and fucking with too much with that.
Right. Yeah.
And then of course I think where we're going to end up spending most of the like remainder of the talk here is of course sanctions. Sanctions against Russia is, I think, the most, I don't know, where I find a lot of like ambiguity. I have a hard time deciding where I land on. So you're definitely more in the pro sanctions camp. For this, for the most part.
Yeah.
Caveats, of course, but.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, I've seen a lot of stuff even recently where people are like, sanctions are an attack against the working class, and it's like, yeah, they are. They are. And I mean, that sucks, but like, what about the working class in Ukraine, who's currently being invaded? I mean, like an ounce of solidarity for those people, please. Like, I know that most of the people who are living in Russia aren't responsible for this at all. Like, I get it, but like, short of armed conflict, what's the other fucking solution? Like the only other solution, because this is the other thing, like the DSA International Committee is like, well, we need to be negotiating about this. It's like, okay, but there's no fucking leverage on the Ukrainian side without sanctions. Sanctions are Ukraine's leverage right now. Yeah. Okay, so you cannot negotiate without both sides having some sort of leverage with each other that they are then willing to give up in order for concessions, right? So international sanctions are part of Ukraine's leverage right now. And that's how you make it so that Russia stops its imperial war. And yes, that means that working people in Russia are going to suffer. But what's the option otherwise? The other option is Ukraine gets taken and the working people of Ukraine suffer. Like, I don't know what the hell else is supposed to be done here.
Yeah, I See, like I agree with that. I struggle to, I don't know. The sanctions seem to be doing some pretty brutal stuff right now, and I can't, like, in good conscience just like give a thumbs up to that, I guess.
Yeah,
But
I don't.
yeah,
I don't love. I don't love that people's lives in Russia are being destroyed right now. Like, it's not great, but like
mm-hmm.
that's Putin's fault.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he didn't need to do this.
Yeah,
He didn't need to do this. And like, and there's just like, I can't think of another way. Right. And something, I actually got I got my like brain turned on this a little bit, a couple of days ago. Somebody was just like, a lot of these people who are mad about sanctions in Russia, which I will also just say this before I get back onto that topic. The United States deploys sanctions really shittily a lot of the time. Like, we have a bunch of sanctions against Venezuela right now that are bullshit and are just making people's lives in Venezuela worse for no fucking reason other than we don't like that country.
The sanctions in Iran,
exactly. The sanctions on Iran are like nonsensical. Like, they're nonsensical. That's actually, that country has honestly basically as good a democracy as the United States has, especially when you consider what democracy looks like in Republican controlled states in this fucking country. Like, Iran basically has the same amount of democracy as the United States. So like, it's just run by a theocratic judiciary. But wait, isn't that okay? Anyway, but like sanctions on Iran and on Venezuela, on Cuba, they're fucking nonsensical. They're stupid. They're dumb. They don't actually help anybody. They're clearly not bringing an end to whatever conflicts we're having with those countries, and they're just immiserating the people there. Right? If you deploy sanctions against a militarily belligerent state in such a way as to cause maximal pain early in their belligerency, that seems much more justifiable to me than just being like, we don't like your vibes, fuck you in particular. You didn't really do anything, but we don't like you, so we're going to make your lives worse. Like, sanctions in response to
an invasion,
to international malfeasance is, I think, completely appropriate, particularly when you consider that like armed conflict between nuclear powers is not a line that is worth crossing.
No, I think you're right. I think I would be more comfortable if the U.S. made, I don't know. I guess it's implied that the sanctions will go away if you get out of Ukraine, but I'd like to see a more clear, like, here's what you can have to do. Here are the criteria you have to meet for us to lift the sanctions, or else I fear, and I'm kind of parroting Derek Davison was making this point, but you know, that what you have the likelihood of increasing like the Russian people's dislike of the U.S. and might increase the tensions there, you know, more so as, you know, as we look into the future of like who's going to take over after Putin. If that occurs in a democratic way, pissing off the population might not be the best thing to do right now. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. But I like, oh, sorry. So the other like little point that I was circling around to before I went on my like other sanctions are bad rant, which I will just say this. I do think that actually in general sanctions are bad because they're used poorly. But when you use sanctions well, then they're good. And like a thing that I was just thinking about a couple of days ago, I got it turned on to me was like a lot of these same people who are upset about these sanctions against Russia right now are the same kind of people who would support BDS against Israel. And what do you think the S stands for? And would that not hurt workers in Israel? Yes, it fucking would. But do you know what? I believe it would be worth it because Palestinian freedom is fucking worth it. You know? Like, Palestinian freedom is worth some pain for Israeli workers.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way, Ukrainian freedom is worth Russian workers having to experience some fucking pain as a direct result of their government's actions. Because that's the other thing, right? Like, the BDS framework works because we're saying, look, if your government chills the fuck out and is nice to Palestinians, we'll stop doing this. Sanctions against the Russian government for invading Ukraine are exactly the same. Hey, if you chill the fuck out and get out of Ukraine, all of this goes away.
Mm-hmm.
We stop hurting you, and it all goes away. And it's like, if you think it's okay over here, why is it not okay over here?
Yeah.
Especially when, I mean, honestly, Palestine has been in a state of war for our entire adult lives, if not longer.
Mm-hmm.
If not longer, right?
Yeah.
You know, I struggle to see much difference. If we're okay with sanctions over here from a leftist perspective, and I do think that it's entirely consistent to think that they're okay over here, then like we should be okay with them over here. I do agree with you that probably there should be started to be articulated relatively soon here some like concrete asks of like, look, start withdrawing and we can start drawing some of this stuff back. But like, it really needs to be something that's verifiable. And like, man, if I'm being completely honest, and I'm Ukraine at this point, given how relatively well this is going and how much the West seems to be willing to like completely destroy the Russian economy. If I'm Ukraine, I'm like, we get everything back. You give us Crimea back, you give us Luhansk back, and you give us Donbass back. We get it all fucking back, and you fuck off forever.
Yeah.
And that is like, because that's the other problem here, is that like we still have Ukraine. Like the Ukrainian government has agency, as well as the Russian government, as well as, you know, the Western powers. All of these people have agency. And honestly, man, I don't see much reason for Ukrainians to give a fucking inch here. And in fact, to be like, you know what? All of that shit you took from us, it's ours again. Get the fuck out.
Yeah.
And that's that makes the end game of all of this very, very hard to like to think through.
Absolutely.
But like, I just, again, I feel like people who know me are going to hear this and hear the things that I've been saying and be like, you're not really a leftist. And I'm like, still feel like I am, though. I still feel like I am demonstrating solidarity with people who are currently undergoing oppression, who are currently facing imperialism. I feel uncomplicatedly fine with my beliefs because, like, I'm a trot and a Gramsciist and a Luxemburgist. You know, like those are my call signs. I'm not a Leninist. I'm not even really actually a Marxist. Like he was good and great, but like I'm definitely like, I'm not like internationalist type who thinks that like, yeah, I should actually just like I should just oppose imperialism.
Yeah.
Like straightforward, like I should just oppose imperialism.
A more morally consistent position in a lot of ways.
It's just, imperialism is bad no matter who the fuck does it. I don't care who does it.
The kind of thesis statement I had of this episode that I think now would be a good time to pull out as we kind of like wrap up a bit here is that the crisis in Ukraine right now, the war in Ukraine right now, is kind of a Rorschach test for what kind of leftist you are, like where your values lie. And that's why I feel like I've seen some pretty bizarre fracturing among the left as they've been fighting about this. And I think for you and I, we are leftists that value internationalism, solidarity, socialism, and democracy. Yeah. I think those would be kind of the things that we hold as, and resistance to imperialism, but I kind of feel like that's implied in all that.
Yeah, it's implied in all of that.
Yeah. And so, but like a lot of the, the term tanky gets misused, but it is correct at times, especially in this context. It feels because, the term tanky, which I've been fucking seeing people try to act like that's a slur. It's so stupid.
Not a slur. You're not an oppressed group. Shut
up. But, it's been used against revolutionary third worldist groups or whatever. Yes. But the term is a reference to the invasion of Hungary, or the suppression of the Hungarian Revolution in the 50s. And it is, are you on the side of the tanks or the protesters? Are you on the side of the imperialists or the side of the people that are standing up and...
Oh my God, you're on the side of the imperialists? What's wrong with you?
Yeah. And so in this case, it feels like, I think there are a lot of people that are more in a middle ground that I still find irritating that should not properly be called tankies. But there are tankies. And I also feel like
it take up entirely too much air.
Yeah.
Especially in the online left conversation. They take up entirely too much air in that whole thing.
And I mean, of course, they have no real power in U.S. politics. No. I'm aware of that. But they do kind of seem to derail DSA conversations. And, they feel like it feels like we're kind of losing track of like, what is this fucking shit about? Because, Putin is, of course, not a communist, but I think there's this desire behind like people who are sympathetic to Assad or Putin or whoever, because they're dictators resisting Western imperialism.
Yeah.
And certainly, but that doesn't make Eastern imperialism good.
Yeah. Any kind of imperialism good. Like it's a thing that we've talked about before, you and I, but like, I think that there is just like a degree to which the American left, because the most active and vocal and organized parts of the American left right now are all people who are under 40, basically. Right? There's like a vanishingly few Gen X burnouts, and then there's like boomer hippies who are just unreconstructed, leftists and are their own fucking thing. But like almost everybody on the left in America right now is under the age of 40, which means that almost every American leftist right now is a person who has lived most of their lives being able to see the United States as uncomplicatedly the bad actor in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because follow the Soviet Union, homogeneity. Yeah.
But like not even that necessarily, but like mostly like because of like it's like almost also as a function of American news media. Because even when American news media is trying to like portray U.S. interventions abroad in a good light, if you're left inclined, you see that and you think, my country's bombing another country again? Jesus fuck. Like we're constantly killing people. And we don't hear very often about other countries behaving imperially, right?
Mm.
When we do, we hear about them in the context of like trying to do like a Red Scare type thing again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so people like there'll be like a buildup of like China's gonna do some bad shit, and then China like maybe does or doesn't do it, but like you kind of can go like, whatever's happening over there, I don't give a shit, right? Or like Russia's gonna do some bad shit, and they're like, yeah, but it's happening over there, and they're staying in their borders, so I don't really give a shit. But like this time, Russia made the mistake of leaving its fucking borders.
Well, and even if you are a like traditional Leninist, right, a full-on typical ML, even a Stalinist, okay, Stalin formed the Popular Front in response to Nazism in Europe. There is a point in which you do need to work with the liberal democracies, the capitalist democracies, whatever, and see that there is a mutual enemy. And I don't want to act like this is World War II. I don't know. I don't know what the fucking future of this is. But like, it is very clear. It's not like I'm saying the U.S. is the good guy or even necessarily the lesser of two evils, but just that like Russia represents imperial aggression, and we cannot like stand for a world order where this is okay. And you know what, people, we should have gotten fucking sanctions. Us and Saudi Arabia should have been sanctioned for Yemen.
Yep,
you know,
absolutely.
We should have. You know, I wish that there was a large power that was able to check us in response to, you know, what's continuing to go on in Yemen and Somalia or whatever.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We should have been sanctioned for Iraq. We should have been sanctioned for Afghanistan too.
Mm-hmm.
Like we should have been sanctioned for any number of things that we have done in our lifetimes. But it's like, just because the United States is evil, and to be clear, the United States is fucking evil.
Mm-hmm.
Like, evil as shit. Like, absolutely. If countries could go to hell, this country would go to hell and be tormented by Satan in the most delicious ways. But, like, just because the United States is evil does not mean that when the United States says somebody else is doing something wrong, that they're not doing something wrong. You know? Like, hey, you shouldn't invade people. Doesn't matter that I keep doing it, but, like, you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't do it. And it should be okay for us to be like, yeah, I know the United States is the hypocrite over here saying that you shouldn't invade people. The United States is a big old hypocrite, but also they're fucking right. You shouldn't invade people. You shouldn't do that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Infuriating how few leftists have been willing to just straightforwardly say that. And there's been more of them the last couple of weeks, but particularly in the lead up to this invasion. Just infuriating how few people were willing to say, no, you shouldn't. No, like, this is unacceptable. You can't invade other countries. It's not okay to do this.
My fellow co-host in Mammonburg, the other podcast I do, she did she did an experiment on Twitter at one point to prove exactly the point you're making, which was she had just tweeted, I'm going to try something here. Putin is bad. And lo and behold, she got ratioed. Tons of people like got mad at her. And it's really bizarre because none of them would say Putin is good, but they instantly clench up because anytime you accuse an enemy of the U.S. as being bad, you know, you're automatically on the side of U.S. imperialism. And, you know, I'm fucking not
on the side of U.S. imperialism. I think it's bad when we act imperially. I think it's bad when any country acts imperially. Imperialism is fucking bad, and it should be opposed.
And I think why the Trots and the anarchists and the social democrats have all been much more reasonable to me, which is a statement that I feel is controversial among some people, but they've been more reasonable to me in my view, is because I think the MLs are struggling. The Leninists and the Maoists are struggling in this post-Soviet world to exactly make sense of the world order, because it used to be very simple. That it was Russia was the good guy and the U.S. was the bad guy. Mm-hmm. You know, after the fall of the Soviet Union, you know, you see the more Leninist types have been struggling to quite grapple onto what is the pinnacle of the good countries. So they might take their hints from Venezuela or Cuba, both of which, you know, they both of which kind of supported Russia, but, you know, not really, like, you know, in partially just as a middle finger to the U.S. and NATO, you know, yeah. So there's kind of this, like, those of people from those traditions kind of grappling for finding the good guy here. And I think the anarchists have had a longer tradition of just not seeing a good guy necessarily and seeing it as a vying of power of different imperial powers.
And like, that's, I mean, it's a thing I said earlier, but it's just like, you can't be a head of a state and be a good person. I just think it's impossible. You cannot be the head of a modern state and be a good person.
Yeah.
You have to make way too many choices that are absolutely morally compromising.
Absolutely.
You know, and like probably even in our socialist utopia, it would probably actually be impossible to be a good head of state. Maybe it would, because it would be a utopia. But like, like it would be fucking hard to be a good head of state of anything. You know? So why bother fucking lionizing these people and just criticize their fucking actions, regardless of who their putative enemy is? Yeah, you hate the United States? Great, me too. I just hate people who oppress people. It's not hard. I have no difficulty squaring this circle.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that it's a pretty morally clear thing, and so I've been really baffled at the response. And I like you said, you're sure a lot of people listening to this will be pissed at you. Like, I put out a Substack piece on this, and I clenched up anticipating the same thing. Like, on the whole, I understand that the general mainstream narrative is pro-Rush or pro-Ukraine, but the leftist discourse right now, whose opinion I care more about. I don't really care how the mainstream views me.
We have talked about this. The mainstream discourse is getting creepily anti-Russian in ways that I think are interesting.
Yeah, that's hard to, because I don't think we'll have enough time to get into it. But one thing to be clear: don't be fucking racist to Russians. Yeah, the fucking Russian immigrant, that lives in your city doesn't fucking have anything to do with this. Like,
what the fuck Vladimir Putin is doing or the Russian army is doing. Like, leave them the fuck alone. Like, don't be weird. And also, like, don't rename Moscow mules. What? Or you're selling Moscow mules in copper cups. Like, don't rename that to an American mule. That's like fucking freedom fry ass shit.
It's the fucking freedom fry.
It was stupid then. It's stupid now. Don't do it. It's dumb. It's dipshit behavior. Like, don't be anti-Russian. Russia is cool. Like, it's a cool culture. There's a lot of cool shit in Russia. Russians are nice people. Yeah. Russia's government sucks.
Yeah, everybody. Now is the time to. I mean, frankly, okay, not to detour this too much, but like, frankly, now is the time to actually look at a lot of Russian culture shit, because, like, man, War and Peace is a novel about, like, now.
Exactly what is happening right now. Fucking The Idiot by Dostoevsky has a lot to say about what's going on right now. Brothers Karamazov, same thing. Like fucking you could damn, you could read anything by Jesus Christ, I gotta go find this fucking book, because it's gonna drive me nuts if I can't remember the name of this goddamn book. Give me a second.
Crime and Punishment?
No, it's not Crime and Punishment.
I'm just kidding.
Oh, duh. It's called Stalingrad.
Stalingrad. Yeah.
By Vasily Grossman. Like Vasily Grossman's works, during from his dispatches on the front line, are
great,
are incredible and extremely relevant to what we're seeing right now. Hold on. Yes, there he goes. His other books are Everything Flows and Life and Fate. Yes. Mm-hmm. I mean, like Grossman is somebody that people should be reading. Like, yes, definitely. You could read some Bulgakov. Like, Bulgakov, incredible and engage with right now.
If you want to look at I don't know, stories about a sense of doom about nuclear apocalypse and shit, Tarkovsky. I mean,
oh my gosh, Lars, Stalker, any number.
Yeah. I mean, I think The Sacrifice is an incredibly underrated film that more people should watch. The point being made, don't be racist to Russians, though.
Russian culture is incredible.
And I think the Russophobia, especially, I think we should be cautious of it, is even if you're like, fuck Russia, right? Fuck Russians. If you hold that mentality, which I think is stupid. But even if you hold that mentality, we're about to get an influx of Ukrainian refugees. Do you really think that angry, stupid white dudes can tell the difference between a Ukrainian and a Russian? It's just going to end up being fucking racism against the people that are fleeing this war.
It's going to be just like how fucking dipshits in this country target Sikhs because they think they're Muslim.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just about to say, Come and See.
Oh, yes.
The movie,
yes.
The movie Come and See. Like, that's a movie that we should all watch right now because, like...
One of the best movies about war ever made, I've been told. I've never seen it. But
it's absolutely fucking harrowing. Yeah. It's great. It's absolutely harrowing, and I probably won't watch it again. That's one of those movies that's one of those once was enough movies. Grave of the Fireflies.
Yeah, that's
also one of those movies.
Also what I've been told. Yes. Oh man. Yeah.
But yeah, like don't be racist against Russians. Russians are dope.
Russians are cool, and like Ukrainians are cool. And I'd like to see Ukrainian art like have a. I hope maybe this attention on Ukraine will make more people care about like the post-Soviet republics and like their culture, because there's a lot there, and
there's a lot going on that's really interesting in a lot of them. Like people need to care more about like the Baltic states too, like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. Like there's a lot of cool shit going on in those places. Like care more about what's going on in Belarus, right? Like Belarus is, I think, actually closer to getting absorbed by Russia than Ukraine is.
Yeah. I mean, they're basically a satellite state of Russia at this point. Yeah. I mean, anyway, God, it's hard to like wrap this conversation up because there's so much you could still keep saying. It's like
we genuinely went from the 800s to now, so very long ranging.
But so yeah, I'll say, like, as always, it was great, Chris. If you are a newer listener to my podcast, going back to VLVC, there's an old episode on the troubles in Ireland and England.
Oh, that's right. Yes. I did do that. I don't think I completely embarrassed myself with that one.
No, that was pretty good. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. That's great. And we hopefully look forward in a few months to an episode on 1848, barring some sort of nuclear exchange that we all die.
At the end of the month, I'm going to be in Des Moines, and hopefully I get to hang out with you.
Yes, we should try to do something. I would like that. Should be able to make that work.
We'll be in town from the 29th of March through April 1st.
Sick. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for listening to Fruitless, and I will see you later this month.
Deuces.
Тишине тишине, мы идем в тишине. По убитой весне